You don't touch royal blood. That's the first rule of the Concordat. You definitely don't put your bare, grease-stained hands on them. But when Dean saw the girl collapsing on the polished floor, her skin turning to grey dust, he didn't think about galactic law. He just reached out. The VIP sector of the Concordat orbital station always smelled faintly of synthesized lavender and ozone. Dean hated it. He much preferred the lower engineering decks, where the air tasted like stale coffee and honest machine oil. Up here, everything was polished white ceramic and brushed steel. Even the light seemed arrogant, angled perfectly to avoid casting shadows on the diplomats strutting below. Dean lay flat on his stomach inside a primary ventilation duct, staring through a reinforced grating at the grand concourse. His heavy wrench rested against his thigh. He was supposed to be recalibrating the atmospheric scrubbers for the arrival of the Celestine Ascendancy delegation. "Control, this is Dean," he muttered into his collar mic, wiping a smear of graphite grease from his forehead. "Scrubber 3 is aligned, but you've got a pressure variance in the lower manifold. If these Celestino guys are as fragile as the brief says, they're going to feel a draft." "Copy that, Dean." Miller's voice crackled back, bored and tinny. "Just seal it up. The delegation is entering the hall now. Do not make a sound. If you drop a wrench on Sovereign Albert's head, I'm docking your pay before they execute you." Dean rolled his eyes. He peered down through the slats. The heavy blast doors of the concourse parted, and the Celestine delegation floated in. They didn't literally float, but their gait was so smooth it defied gravity. They were tall. The shortest among them stood nearly 7 feet, their limbs long and spindly, wrapped in shimmering white fabrics that seemed to catch the light and hold it. The universal translator had assigned them standard terrestrial names for the sake of human comfort, though Dean suspected Albert sounded a lot less majestic than whatever multitonal hum the alien king actually called himself. Right beside King Albert was Princess Aurelia. Dean adjusted his grip on the grating. The briefing packet said the Celestines were a crystalline carbon hybrid species. They didn't have blood like humans. They had a conductive fluid that carried light and kinetic energy through their bodies. Her skin was a pale, translucent silver, laced with faint veins of glowing blue. She looked like she was carved from frosted glass. Beautiful, sure. But Dean just saw a biological nightmare waiting to happen. They were fragile. A human could trip, fall down a flight of stairs, break an arm and walk away complaining. If a Celestine fell, their internal hydrostatic pressure could shatter their organs. They relied on ambient temperature and specialized kinetic shields just to survive outside their home world. Dean watched as the human ambassador, a stiff suit named Preston, stepped forward to greet them. Then the lights flickered. It wasn't a station-wide power failure. It was a localized pulse. Dean felt the hairs on his arms stand up. The air pressure in the vent dropped violently, popping his ears. Down on the floor, an invisible wave ripped through the concourse. The human ambassador stumbled back, blinking in confusion. But the Celestines didn't stumble. They crumpled. It was silent. That was the terrifying part. There was no explosion, just a sharp, electronic snap. And then Princess Aurelia collapsed. She hit the marble floor hard. The sound was sickening, like a heavy porcelain vase hitting concrete. Chaos erupted. The Celestine guards, wrapped in ceremonial armor, formed a desperate circle around the king and the princess. They didn't draw weapons. They drew medical stabilizers. Glowing rods of amber light swept over Aurelia's body. Dean pressed his face against the grate. "Miller, we got a situation. An EMP, or some kind of neural dampener, just went off in the concourse." "Stay put, Dean. Security is scrambling." Down below, the frantic chirping of the alien medical scanners was growing frantic. Dean had spent 3 years fixing life support tech across the station. He knew what a flatlining machine sounded like, no matter what species built it. Through the grate, he saw Aurelia's skin. The soft, bioluminescent blue veins were dimming. The translucent silver of her flesh was frosting over, turning a dull, chalky grey. Stasis death. The Celestines regulated their core temperature and internal pressure through bioelectric feedback. The pulse had knocked out her internal rhythm. She wasn't bleeding. She was freezing from the inside out, her fluid solidifying. The alien medics were desperately waving their ambient heat rods over her. But the output was too low. They were trying to warm up a frozen engine with a match. "They're losing her," Dean said, his voice dropping. He didn't think. It was a stupid, impulsive, deeply human reaction to seeing something dying. He kicked the latch on the grating. The heavy steel square popped loose. Dean dropped from the ceiling. He hit the marble floor with a bone-jarring thud. 210 pounds of dense terrestrial muscle, heavy bones, and a thick canvas maintenance suit. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the pristine hall. The Celestine guards turned, their narrow eyes blowing wide in shock as a dirty, grease-covered human dropped from the sky into their sacred perimeter. 2 of the guards stepped forward, raising long, electrified pikes. They shouted something in their native tongue, a sharp, crystalline chime of pure hostility. Dean didn't care. He lowered his shoulder and plowed forward. When a human hits a low-gravity species, the physics are entirely one-sided. Dean felt the guard's pike glance off his heavy leather shoulder pad, harmlessly discharging into the grounded fabric of his suit. He hit the guard center mass. The 7-foot alien went flying backward like a hollow mannequin, sliding 10 feet across the polished floor. King Albert let out a sound of pure horror. Dean slid to his knees right beside the princess. The alien medic shrieked, swinging a delicate, long-fingered hand at Dean's face. Dean caught the wrist without looking, his thick, grease-stained fingers wrapping around the alien's brittle forearm. He squeezed just enough to hold him, shoving the medic aside. "Back off," Dean growled. He didn't know if his translator was working, but his tone was universal. He looked down at Aurelia. She was completely grey. Her eyes were rolled back, showing only blank, frosted silver. Her chest wasn't moving. The air around her was actually precipitating, little flakes of frost forming on her regal white dress. She needs heat, she needs a jump start. Dean ripped off his heavy insulated work gloves, throwing them onto the marble. "Don't!" the human ambassador screamed from the periphery. "Dean, what the hell are you doing? They are toxic to touch. The biofeedback will kill her." Dean ignored him. "Humans are walking furnaces. We burn calories at a rate that terrifies other species, generating a massive, constant aura of thermal radiation. More than that, our nervous systems run on raw, heavy electrical impulses. To a sensitive species, touching a bare human is like licking a battery." Dean slammed his bare hands onto Aurelia's collarbones. The moment flesh met flesh, Dean gasped. It was like plunging his hands into a bucket of liquid nitrogen. The sheer, biting cold of the alien girl's skin sent a shockwave of pain straight up his forearms. His muscles locked. For a split second, he thought the ambassador was right. He had just killed her, and he was going to die with her. But humans are stubborn. Biological engines designed to survive ice ages and desert heat. Dean's heart hammered against his ribs, a heavy, rhythmic thudding that pumped hot, oxygen-rich mammalian blood through his veins. His body detected the catastrophic temperature drop in his hands and went into immediate overdrive. His core temperature spiked. Sweat pricked his forehead. Under his rough, calloused palms, something happened. The chalky, frost-bitten grey on Aurelia's skin stopped spreading. A sharp, audible crack of static electricity arched between Dean's knuckles and her neck. To the Celestines, a human's resting bioelectric field was chaotic, loud, and unrefined. But right now, that chaos was a defibrillator. Aurelia's back arched off the floor. Her mouth opened, taking in a sharp, jagged gasp of air that sounded like crushing glass. The alien medics behind Dean fell completely silent. King Albert froze, his hands trembling as he stared at the impossible scene. Dean leaned over her, shifting his weight, pressing his hands firmer against her icy skin. "Come on," he muttered, his voice tight with exertion. The cold was agonizing. His hands were turning blue, but he could feel it working. "Come on, kid. Breathe, just breathe." He channeled everything he had, imagining himself as a furnace, burning the heavy carbohydrates from his cheap station cafeteria breakfast, turning it into raw, radiant heat. He was sweating profusely now, heavy drops of salty human sweat dripping from his chin onto the pristine white fabric of her dress. Aurelia's eyes snapped open. They weren't blank anymore. The pupils were wide, glowing with a frantic, pulsing blue light. She stared straight up at the dirty, scowling face of the human hovering over her. Her spindly, delicate hands shot up. She didn't push him away. She grabbed his wrists. Her grip was shockingly tight. Her long fingers, cold as ice, locked around Dean's thick forearms. She was drawing from him. Dean could actually feel the heat being leached from his body, pulled into her failing circulatory system. The blue veins under her silver skin began to glow again, starting from where Dean's hands gripped her collarbones, spreading outward like roots, finding water. The frost on her dress began to melt, turning into tiny beads of moisture. "King Albert," the ambassador stammered, his voice trembling as he watched the monitor the medic had dropped. Her hydrostatic pressure. It's climbing. The thermal decay has reversed." The medic, picking himself up off the floor, stared at his datapad as if it had offended him. He pointed a trembling, elongated finger at Dean. "Impossible. The mammalian output. It is too violent. It should have ruptured her neural pathways. He is overloading her." "I'm keeping her alive, you overgrown glow stick," Dean barked over his shoulder, not breaking eye contact with the princess. Aurelia was hyperventilating now, but the grey was gone. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, shuddering rhythms. The ambient temperature around them was rising. Dean was panting, feeling dizzy as his body poured out thermal and electrical energy into the void of the alien's broken system. He could feel her pulse under his thumbs. It wasn't the steady thump-thump of a human heart. It was a rapid, high-frequency hum, like a hard drive spinning up to maximum velocity, and it was syncing with his own heartbeat. The heavy, slow rhythm of the human was forcing the erratic alien pulse into a stable tempo. Slowly, the frantic grip on his wrists loosened. Aurelia's breathing slowed. The terrifying cold radiating from her skin faded, replaced by a cool, stable temperature, like touching glass on a spring morning. She looked up at Dean. Her expression was utterly unreadable by human standards, but her bioluminescence was flushing a soft, rhythmic indigo. Dean finally pulled his hands back. He fell back on his heels, sitting heavily on the marble floor. He looked at his hands. They were bright red, steaming slightly in the climate-controlled air of the concourse, numb from the extreme thermal transfer. He wiped his sweating forehead with the back of his wrist, leaving a fresh streak of black grease across his face. The silence in the grand hall was absolute. Every gun in the Celestine security detail was now pointed directly at Dean's head. "Don't shoot!" Ambassador Preston yelled, waving his arms. "By the Concordat, do not fire! He just saved her!" King Albert stepped forward. He didn't look angry. He looked terrified. He looked down at Dean, then down at his daughter. "You," King Albert began. His voice filtered through the translator into a deep, echoing baritone. "You touched the sovereign blood. With bare flesh, Dean looked up at the towering alien monarch. He was exhausted. His head was pounding from the adrenaline crash. He picked up his discarded work gloves, stuffing them into his heavy tool belt. "Yeah, well," Dean rasped, leaning back on his hands. "She was dying. Your guys were trying to warm her up with flashlights. Seemed like a bad plan." The alien medic dropped to his knees beside the princess, running his scanner over her. He looked up at the king, his eyes wide. "My sovereign. Her core temperature is stable. Her neural pathways are completely saturated with a massive kinetic charge. It is holding the stasis decay back entirely." King Albert stared at Dean as if the human were a live bomb. "How?" the king whispered. "I'm a human, pal," Dean said, slowly pushing himself up to his feet. His knees popped audibly, drawing flinches from the alien guards. "We run hot. We're heavy. We're dense. And we don't freeze easy. Whoever set off that EMP knew exactly what it would do to your internal heaters. But they didn't account for a guy in the ceiling who skipped the salad bar for breakfast." Dean brushed a thick layer of dust from his coveralls. He looked around at the dozen energy weapons still trained on him. "Now," Dean sighed, looking over at Ambassador Preston, who looked like he was about to have a heart attack. "Can someone get the kid a blanket? She's still shivering. And someone tell Miller I'm taking my break." Before Preston could answer, Princess Aurelia weakly raised a hand. The guards immediately lowered their weapons, stepping back. She tried to sit up, her silver skin flushing a deep, embarrassed violet. She looked at the smudged handprints of black grease left on her pristine white collarbones. Then she looked at Dean, her wide, glowing eyes locking onto his. "Human," her voice chimed softly through the translator, carrying a strange melodic echo. "Your fire. It is still inside me." Dean scratched his beard, feeling incredibly awkward. "That's just latent body heat, princess. Give it an hour. It'll wear off." The alien medic shook his head slowly, looking at his datapad in total disbelief. "No, it is not wearing off. His charge. It bonded with her matrix. It is sustaining her." Dean paused, his hand still on his beard. "Wait. What?" King Albert stepped closer, the fear in his eyes replaced by a sudden, intense calculation. He looked at Dean, a simple maintenance worker covered in dirt and machine oil, standing in the middle of the most secure diplomatic hall in the sector. "Arrest him," King Albert commanded quietly. Ambassador Preston gasped. "Sovereign, you cannot—" "I said arrest him," the king repeated, his gaze never leaving Dean. "But do not harm him. If what my physician says is true, this human is now the only thing keeping my daughter alive." "He comes with us," Dean groaned, letting his head fall back as the guards slowly closed in. "Miller," Dean muttered toward his dead comms piece. "I'm gonna need some overtime pay for this." The medical bay of the Celestine flagship smelled like static electricity and crushed peppermint. Dean sat on a floating diagnostic slab, his heavy boots dangling off the edge. They had confiscated his wrench, which annoyed him more than the armed guards stationed outside the blast doors. Aurelia lay on a suspended field of light in the center of the room. The chalky gray was completely gone from her skin, replaced by her natural frosted silver. The bioluminescent veins pulsed in a steady, rhythmic indigo. Every time Dean shifted his weight, the light in her veins flared. "Stop doing that," the alien physician hissed. His name was Xylar, or at least that's what the translator supplied. He was frantically tapping at a crystalline display screen. "Doing what?" Dean asked, scratching his beard. "Metabolizing," Xylar snapped. "Your heart rate elevates, your thermal output increases, and it spikes her internal hydrostatic pressure. You are tethered, human. Your bioelectric field has created a parasitic feedback loop with her carbon matrix." "I saved her life," Dean grunted, hopping down from the slab. His boots slammed against the deck plating. Aurelia gasped softly on her bed of light. The blue veins in her neck pulsed brightly in time with the sound of his boots. Dean froze. He looked down at his feet, then back at the princess. "You've got to be kidding me. She's synchronized to my literal footsteps? You forced a massive kinetic and thermal charge into a system that was shutting down," Xylar explained, rubbing his temples with long, brittle fingers. "Her body accepted your energy as a surrogate pacemaker. Until her own core regenerates the damage from the EMP, she requires your ambient radiation. If you move more than 50 meters away from her, she will freeze to death in minutes. So I'm a space heater." Dean crossed his arms, the thick fabric of his maintenance suit pulling tight across his broad shoulders. "Great. For how long?" "Weeks," a deep voice boomed. The medical bay doors slid open. King Albert stepped through. Without the ceremonial robes of the diplomatic concourse, the alien monarch looked less like a deity and more like a tired, fragile old man. The glowing veins under his silver skin were dim, flashing an anxious yellow. He didn't look at his daughter. He looked straight at Dean. "The assassination attempt was orchestrated by a splinter faction of our own royal court," Albert said. His translator clipped the words, making them sound harsh and mechanical. "They knew human security would scan for ballistics and energy weapons. They smuggled a localized thermal dampener onto the station. It was designed to look like a tragic biological failure." Dean narrowed his eyes. "And I ruined it by being too dense and too hot to care." "Precisely." Albert stepped closer, his towering frame looming over the human. "They will try again. If they realize my daughter survived, and that a human laborer is the only thing keeping her alive, they will not target her. They will target you." "Let them," Dean said. He didn't puff out his chest. He didn't yell. He just stated a fact. "I weigh 200 pounds. My bones are packed with calcium, and I drink water that would dissolve your stomach lining. If your assassins want to come after me, they better bring a bigger gun." A soft, melodic laugh chimed from the diagnostic bed. Dean turned. Aurelia was sitting up. The blanket of light draped over her shoulders like a shawl. Her wide, glowing eyes were fixed on Dean, crinkling at the corners. It was a distinctly human expression on an alien face. "He is unrefined, Father," Aurelia said, her voice echoing softly in the sterile room. "But he is solid. I can feel him in my chest. It is like standing next to a dying star. So loud, so angry, so warm." Dean shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not angry, Princess. I just want a cup of coffee and my wrench back." "You will be compensated," Albert said, ignoring the banter. "The Concordat is drafting an emergency diplomatic addendum as we speak. You are being officially contracted as a biological support specialist to the Celestine Crown. Your human government was highly motivated to agree when I threatened to cut off their synthetic fuel supply." "Wait," Dean held up a heavy, calloused hand. "You bought me?" "I hired you," Albert corrected. "The salary is equivalent to a planetary governor's." Dean blinked. He did the math in his head. It was a lot of zeros. "Union rules still apply?" Albert stared at him, utterly baffled. "What?" "Overtime," Dean said flatly. "Hazard pay, mandatory breaks. And if I have to follow her around, I want decent food. Not this nutrient-paste garbage you guys eat. I need red meat and carbohydrates, or my furnace shuts down. If my furnace shuts down, she freezes." Before Albert could argue, the ship violently lurched. The lights in the medical bay flickered and died. Emergency crimson strobes kicked on, bathing the white room in harsh red flashes. The deck plates vibrated under Dean's boots. Clang, clang, clang. Heavy magnetic locks engaged down the corridor. "Hull breach on the lower decks!" Xylar shrieked, clutching a datapad to his chest. "We are boarded!" "They tracked the launch trajectory," Albert said, his voice dropping an octave in pure dread. The dampener on the station was merely the first phase. They have come to finish it. Dean didn't wait for orders. The instinct that drove him out of the ceiling vent earlier took over. He grabbed the heavy steel tray, holding Zylar's delicate surgical tools, dumped the instruments on the floor, and weighed the tray in his hands. Solid titanium. About 10 pounds. It would do. "King, get behind the bed!" Dean barked, his voice cutting through the panic. "Doc, seal that door manually and cut the electronic override." "You cannot command me," Albert roared. "I'm the only thing standing between you and the void right now, tall guy," Dean shouted back. "Move!" The door hissed as the electronic lock fought an external hack. Sparks showered from the control panel. Someone on the other side was burning through the bulkhead. Dean stepped in front of Aurelia's bed. He could feel the sudden drop in her body temperature. Fear was spiking her hydrostatic pressure, and the cold of the ship was seeping back in. He reached backward without looking, his bare hand grabbing her delicate, icy ankle. The moment he touched her, the red glow of the emergency light seemed to catch in her veins. She gasped, drawing on his heat. Dean felt the sudden, exhausting drain on his body, a deep chill creeping up his spine. He ground his teeth, forcing himself to breathe deep, pumping hot blood through his muscles. The door exploded inward. 3 figures stepped through the smoke. They were Celestines, but not wearing the shimmering white silk of the royal court. They wore matte black kinetic armor, carrying heavy suppression rifles designed to shatter crystalline physiology with sound waves. The lead assassin raised his rifle, aiming directly at Aurelia. He didn't factor in human density. Dean threw the titanium surgical tray like a frisbee, powered by a heavy, dense shoulder and a lifetime of wrenching rusted bolts. The metal disc flew across the room with terrifying velocity. It caught the lead assassin square in the chest piece. The kinetic armor absorbed the blow, but the sheer, blunt force of a 10-pound weight moving at 60 miles an hour was too much for the fragile alien skeleton underneath. The assassin flew backward into the corridor, a sickening crunch echoing over the alarms. The other 2 assassins hesitated, their glowing eyes wide in shock. They had prepared for alien guards. They had not prepared for an angry ape throwing heavy metal objects. That hesitation was all Dean needed. He lunged forward, letting go of Aurelia's ankle. The 50-meter tether rule was still in play. He closed the gap in 3 massive strides. The second assassin swung his rifle like a club. Dean took the hit on his thick forearm. The metal stock bruised his muscle, but it didn't break the bone. Dean grabbed the rifle barrel, yanked the alien forward, and drove his heavy work boot into the assassin's knee. The joint shattered like glass. The alien crumpled with a high-pitched chime of pain. The final assassin leveled his weapon at Dean's chest and pulled the trigger. A wave of concentrated sound hit Dean. It felt like being punched in the lungs by a mattress. The breath was knocked out of him, and his ears rang with a deafening screech. But his mammalian organs didn't rupture. They just bruised. Dean spat blood onto the pristine white floor. He grinned. It was a terrifying, feral expression. "My turn," Dean growled. He stepped inside the rifle's reach, grabbed the front of the assassin's matte black armor with both hands, and headbutted the alien right in the faceplate. The visor cracked. The assassin dropped like a stone. Silence fell over the medical bay, broken only by the pulsing red emergency lights and Dean's heavy, ragged breathing. He stood over the 3 broken bodies, his knuckles bleeding, his chest heaving. He turned back to look at the royal family. King Albert was pressed against the far wall, his jaw slack in absolute horror at the raw, brutal display of physical violence. Zylar was hiding under a desk. Only Aurelia sat perfectly still. She was watching Dean. Her bioluminescence wasn't yellow with fear or indigo with a steady pulse. It was flushing a deep, radiant crimson. She was drawing on the massive surge of adrenaline radiating off him. Dean wiped his bloody mouth with the back of his hand, leaving a smear of red mixed with the black grease on his cheek. He walked slowly back to the diagnostic bed and sat down heavily on the edge next to the princess. He held out his hand. Aurelia didn't hesitate. She reached out and wrapped her long, cold fingers around his thick, calloused palm. The connection sparked. Her temperature stabilized instantly. Dean looked over at King Albert, who was still staring at the incapacitated assassins in the hallway. "So," Dean said, his chest still heaving as he tightened his grip on the princess's hand. "About that planetary governor's salary. I want it paid in weekly installments, and I get weekends off. Deal?" King Albert swallowed hard, looking from the blood on the floor to the grease-stained human, holding his daughter's hand. "Deal," the king whispered. "If you enjoyed this HFY story of human grit, blue-collar survival, and an unlikely bond between a mechanic and an alien princess, hit that like button. What did you think of Dean's brutal defense against the assassins? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans, and subscribe to the channel for more original, thrilling HFY stories delivered right to your feed. See you in the next one.